What's good, everyone? Welcome into Kingdom Economics. This is season 6, and we are now in episode 7. Today, we are going to be going over the rest of my childhood. We're also going to go in through MK variant scale. We're going to talk about the book of Revelation and books that were taken out. We're also going to talk about the control of scriptural transmission and the Emperor Justinian document. That's all coming to you right now. So, the first one that we're going to be getting into, like I said, is the rest of my childhood. And we're going to start off with field trips. Now, I'm not saying that I only had field trips. This is, for example, what's known as sub-project gate walk, not gateway, but gate walk for field trips. So the black book used for something like this. So I went to the Crayola factory. So trips like the Crayola factory and science exhibits weren't random. They were location-based energetic activations. Now, Crayola is deeply tied to color spectrum frequency. Children gifted in visionary realms are color-coded spiritually. Like, blue is revelatory or seer, red is warrior, green is a healer, so on and so forth. Now, Crayola helped catalog which children resonated with which colors. Science exhibits often embed cosmic false narrative programming, like Big Bang, evolution, aliens as creators, etc., to displace God-given origin memory. To map this energetically, field trips allowed surveillance teams to track spiritual resonance reactions in new grid locations, especially children with angelic memory remnants. So, to give a summary from last time, including the one that I just covered, you have hearing test, vendor days, pizza/hoagie days, and field trips. Hearing test was sub-project Echo Veil, vendor days was nostalgia, pizza/hoagie days was sustain, and field trips was known as gate walk. That's one word, gate walk. For the hearing test, the purpose was frequency and prophetic resonance testing. For the vendor days, it was to identify fixation and habit loop creation. The pizza/hoagie days was to figure out the reward cycles and spiritual replacement. And then the field trips was about energetic response mapping across geolocations. Now, what I'm going to get into next are my church. Well, the churches that I attended. The first one that I attended was called St. Matthew's. Now, it's not a Catholic church. It is I believe they're still operating today. If I remember last year that I checked, is a Baptist church. Now, they just used the name for that church. And this Black Book project was called Golgotha Mirror. The purpose was to originally a legitimate spiritual node. St. Matthew's was inverted subtly over time. It became a testing ground for theological inversion through trauma-based congregational programming. So some indicators was programmatic emphasis on guilt, shame, or perfectionism, which meant psychological structures designed to disconnect children from divine sonship. Yeah, there was no teaching of how to operate spiritually. Now, the architecture there likely follows Jesuit-influenced ratios, which are geometric blueprints for controlled resonance fields. Think of it as occult spiritual acoustics. And children or congregants with prophetic gifts were often silenced subtly, either discouraged from questions or overwhelmed by constant religious routine to shut down supernatural discernment. Now, for myself, there wasn't the exactly discouragement from the questions for myself and what I saw, but more so the constant religious routine that shut down that supernatural discernment. So, Project Golgotha Mirror was an inversion of suffering, teaching the cross without glory, trauma without redemption. There was another one as well called Project Vestige. Now, mind you, again, before I continue forward, all the research that I have here for you, some of it I can 100% verify. Others, I want you to do your own due diligence, do your own research, because that way you're getting confirmation of what you're receiving just as much as what I've been providing. For something like this, I want everyone to know it's not always about something that has to be exactly the same thing, rather similarities, because there are a lot of sub-projects to a larger project for many different areas of society. And these things I did not even learn about until much later. Some people, when they're in it, are even told about it. So, with that being said, the other project was called Vestige at St. Matthew's, or focused on imprinting religious images and hymns with disempowering emotional charges, singing or iconography linked to spiritual control. Now, there was a church on the same street, just on the other block. Like, it wasn't a far walk. It wasn't like directly across from St. Matthew's, but it was on the corner where it would meet the main road. And then church I was at was on the same road, but then there's this side street. Well, the one that was near the main road, the Lutheran church, this was a project known as Split Tabernacle. So the purpose there was the close proximity of two major denominational churches is not accidental. You'll never find that to be accidental, ever. It forms a spiritual feedback loop that creates doctrinal conflict grids. Now, how this works is that each church acts like a signal tower for different frequencies of partial truth. Okay? Now, this causes vibrational dissonance in the realm, especially dangerous to prophetically gifted youth who sense something's off, but they can't name it. Now, this is part of a wider project, Split Tabernacle, which was deployed in small towns to 1. Split the spiritual atmosphere, 2. Cause the inner church confusion, 3. Prevent the flow of true revelation from taking root in young leaders. Now, the reason why I bring up this church is for the sole reason that there was an explosion that happened to St. Matthew's in the year 2000. And so we had to attend the Lutheran Church, well, the administrative staff for St. Matthew's was borrowing the Lutheran Church. And so what happened, what we were told, is that the heater blew up the side of the building. That made no sense to me. I'm like, a heater, that doesn't make any sense. Had to do something with the janitor or whatever. It was a bit vague as to how it happened. Saying it was more like negligence on a janitor. And it's like, well, negligence on a janitor isn't really going to have a heater just massively explode because they forgot something one time. I mean, come on. So, it was basically a cover event. The explosion in 2000 that damaged the church and surrounding structures, because it didn't fully damage next door. It did some of it, some damage, but mainly it was the church. But it was a ritual detonation event meant to seal or collapse an underground access point, likely connected to a closed node tied to pre-Adamic surveillance infrastructure under the city that I was attending for this church was in Emmaus. So that's Emmaus, Pennsylvania. Now, the explosion activated a sub-project called Flagstone Divergence, okay, which did 3 things. Destroyed evidence of subterranean work, recalibrated the electromagnetic signature of that town block, and it released emotional trauma waves through the population as spiritual cover. So the aftermath of something like this, children, mind you, this was as it happened at night, but since very many people were just not there, but children, especially those with spiritual sight, often reported nightmares, spiritual confusion, identity crises, or strange memories from around that period. That was due to frequency bleeding into their soul gates when the event occurred. Now, there is a strategic purpose of the block in the city of Emmaus, known as the Emmaus Block Cluster, between 1992 and 2006. So, as we know, 2 churches in one block. It's a dual gate conflict construct, frequency interference system. For the children's ministry, however, it was harvesting spiritually gifted children into suppression grids. Now, with the year 2000 explosion, as a ritual collapse and electromagnetic repatterning, the town name, however, Emmaus, is scriptural camouflage, which blinds true seers to the inversion. Now, the use of Emmaus, a name from Luke 24, where Yeshua appears to disciples after resurrection, is highly symbolic. False resurrection frequency used to create simulacra of revival without the presence of Yeshua. Now, to go into a black book project about this is known as White Veil Protocol. Subgrid ID is Meno line echo, or Meno-line echo. And its project overview is the initiative was designed to embed controlled spiritual frequencies inside pacifist, humble, and highly structured religious environments, where generational trauma and theological conditioning could be used to mute emerging spiritual warriors and invert the divine mantle of meekness into passivity, guilt, and submission. Now, aside from this, I did also attend a Mennonite church. So then, why was there a Mennonite church involved? Well, because it was my dad's. My dad grew up Mennonite. But Mennonite communities often uphold nonviolence, simplicity, modesty, and humility, noble traits when aligned properly. Now, the enemy exploited these by embedding frequencies of suppression, shame-based doctrine, and emotional control into sermons, group dynamics, and tradition. It ensured that those with prophetic or kingly destinies would be repeatedly discouraged from boldness, especially if they began asking deep spiritual questions or demonstrating gifts of the Ruach. Now, the specific tactics used in this church which was in Reinholds, Pennsylvania, and a bit of Cocalico. So those are two different cities, mind you. There's a pre-naming that was involved. And so it was a frequency dampening via acoustic geometry. The church interior was likely built or retrofitted with specific wood panel angles and aesthetic symmetry, designed to absorb and mute spiritual charge during worship. Now, this creates a sense of dryness or routine for those with activated spirit man, even in the presence of beautiful music or sincere preaching. There's also a mimetic layering of false humility, where core sermons were energetically imprinted to emphasize unworthiness or over-inheritance, overteach obedience at the expense of divine collaboration, and discourage questions, especially those involving supernatural gifts or divine rulership. Now, this is part of a sub-program labeled Bride in Chains, used to confine the emerging bride of Yeshua to mental cages of performance and denial of spiritual authority. I could definitely understand it. There's still some of that. Not from me, but from speaking to my stepmom last year. Denial of spiritual authority is still present in her, which I could tell then is also present in my father. So that's how I can really understand that it's when you don't deprogram and heal, yes, that stuff will stay. But there was also infiltrated leadership cells. Some Mennonite leaders during this time period were unknowingly programmed through intergenerational trauma, or seminary models that subtly inverted the teaching of power, joy, and glory into rigidity and fear of excess, which I believe my dad went through. This was reinforced by black book spiritual monitoring systems labeled Shadow Shepherd nodes, often assigned per zip code to monitor individuals with rising light frequencies. Another Black Book subproject is known as Project Olive Furnace. Now, this was specifically tied to gifted children growing up in these pacified spiritual environments. Now, the goal was to detect and redirect leadership potential in children into roles of support instead of leadership. This would also discourage any expression of prophetic dreams, visions, or spiritual hunger that extended beyond pre-approved doctrine. They would also use field trips, games, or prizes to anchor children into compliance-based pleasure-reward systems, subtly turning spiritual hunger into behavioral reward loops. Now, some insight as to why I was there. My presence in that church, the Mennonite church, because I did shift gears from the St. Matthew Baptist Church and into the Mennonite church. But it wasn't accidental. It likely served these purposes such as spiritual reconnaissance. Now, even though my spirit was still in bondage, he was scanning the environment, identifying what was off beneath the surface, even if I couldn't name it. There's also seed placement. I was likely planted by Shemaim as a spiritual seed, so the frequencies of divine kingship, warfare, and truth would pressurize against the counterfeit peace of that environment. And there's also memory markers where certain moments may have been spiritually time-stamped to activate later as keys to unlock stolen authority, especially now that I'm seeking full reclamation of divine technology, power, and mandate. And you'll have similar things come up if you also went through similar experiences. So I can't just say it's only me. All right. Now, the next Black Book project was called Maple Vale / Echo Anvil. Subgrade was PA for Pennsylvania hyphen 112 / Libra Gate. This was between 1998 to the present. This would be focused on as the Brownstone Colonial Inn, the bed and breakfast that my stepmom and dad operate. The primary use of the site is that the Brownstone Colonial Inn is under the guise of peaceful hospitality and historic preservation, with containment and mirroring of divine seed through soft programming, nostalgia loops, and multi-generational soul tethering. It has likely served as a soft programming location with 3 major functions over the years. Well, those would be, for example, interdimensional interfacing point, which is known as IIP. So the building sits on limestone and iron deposits, ideal for natural geomagnetic anomaly amplification. Now, these sites are often chosen for their spiritual acoustics, where layered time memories, soul fragments, and ley line overlays intersect. And the stone and wood interior holds energetic imprints well, allowing for memory field entrapment or ancestral echo looping. Second would be generational gating and observation. Individuals, especially children or sensitive adults, who stayed at or near the inn may have been tagged through genetic resonance testing, a non-invasive monitoring system using light, sound, and scent cues embedded in the environment. Now, these were Black Book soul field recon sensors, watching for signs of multi-generational divine inheritance lines that could interfere with endgame plans. And guests showing signs of spiritual awakening or anomalous dreams were often quietly tracked via invisible hospitality protocol feedback loops. Then there's also the Echo Anvil programming. It was a protocol designed to pressurize spiritually gifted people through nostalgia, guilt, and subtle soul binding to locations that feel emotionally safe. Functions by creating false peace and faux belonging, making it harder to discern spiritual suppression masked as heritage or simplicity. So before I continue, I want you all to know my dad and stepmom were not programmers. They were programmed by the enemy unknowingly. And so they have much of that still within them. Now, the known energy structures and project layers at Brownstone Colonial Inn. At the surface, it's a historic bed and breakfast, colonial charm. Its cloaking method is heritage tourism, family-friendly language. Mid-tier is this sole observation for intergenerational resonance. Its cloaking method here is peaceful decor, Mennonite and Amish themes. On a deep tier level, in that layer, the function is emotional dampening and gift suppression tech. The cloaking method here is crystalline lay anchors below cellar/foundation. Now, some key black book protocols that are deployed. We have Maiden's Rest, which is designed to keep prophetic women or seers in slumber by associating activation with instability or rebellion. Many visiting women were targeted if their spiritual lineage connected to Deborah, Miriam, or Anna archetypes. There was also white cord looping, which is a mental tethering system using color for coated linens, specific scents like lavender and cinnamon, sound triggers for like clock ticks and wind chimes, and these would encode emotional memory loops, binding visitors to timelines of incompletion or passive comfort, preventing them from breaking into warrior or kingly activation. Now, who was involved energetically? Well, we have the caretaker lineage, and then we have the program handlers and the invisible monitors. So the caretaker would be often unconscious participants, descendants of prior land stewards who unknowingly carry out energetic bindings. My dad and stepmom. The program handlers were rarely on site, but may drop in as guests or vendors to perform tuning rituals. Now, the invisible monitors, these were entities assigned to keep the spiritual grid dormant, operate via dream interference and environmental atmosphere. Now, my connection is that I visited the property, passed by it frequently, because staying with my dad and stepmom, my half-brothers. I had maybe some unusual dreams near that region, or actually I did, yes. Or I felt both comfort and suppression in one place, which I did. Which I did encounter maybe not at the time, but layered soul mirroring or memory capture via the site's energetic grid. Now, specifically my dad and stepmom's role. Now, they were most likely involved in unconscious alignment, meaning they were identified by bloodline resonance or legal spiritual contracts, often inherited, entrusted with caretaking of a key node without being aware of what was encoded beneath or within the structures. Given natural favor or success through unexplainable circumstances because the system needed loyal gatekeepers to maintain the veil without question. Unknowingly involved how? Well, renovations or improvements they made may have actually reactivated hidden sigils or ley line nodes. Hosting guests and encouraging a restful experience activated the Echo Anvil Code, where hospitality becomes a form of soul softening to prevent spiritual warriorship. Their dreams, moods, and decisions could have been steered subtly by environmental programming, especially if they've had memory lapses, strange illnesses, or emotional loops tied to the place. Yeah. I would definitely say such after speaking to my stepmom last year. If either of them has heritage connected to secret societies, European bloodlines, Mennonite ties, or military intelligence, they may have been selected as natural anchors for this site. Now, talking about myself with this place specifically, since I grew up there, my soul would have been under constant observation by the Black Book systems. They would have tested for prophetic markers in dreams, emotions, sudden bursts of insight. Rebellion against the program, feeling suffocated, watched, or too heavy there, as well as unexplainable awareness or memories that didn't make sense for my age. If I were chosen or tracked, I was likely seen as a threat and a target if my divine assignment included cracking ancient systems, breaking generational covenants, reclaiming the land or bloodline. Now, the system would deploy 3 different types of methods: emotional looping, dream hijacks, relationship mirroring. Well, the emotional looping would be making me feel guilty for leaving, forgetting, or speaking truth about it. The dream hijacks were false peace dreams or layered nightmare sequences to confuse my discernment. Then a relationship mirroring is where the step-family dynamics reflecting deeper spiritual structures meant to weaken my identity. Now, here's some ways how to discern their involvement. Some questions just to ask. Are there moments of unexplained spiritual heaviness, especially in certain rooms or seasons? And did my stepmom or dad ever repeat phrases that felt off or echoed other people's words verbatim? That can be a sign of subconscious programming. Now, these aren't just questions for me, but maybe some questions for you as well that's watching. Was there a shift in energy around 2006 to 2008 or in the 2012 period? That's when a lot of legacy Black Book grids were upgraded. Now, if they experienced supernatural favor, sudden dreams of protecting the place, or even health issues after being away too long, it suggests the site was bonded to them spiritually. Some black book triggers that are embedded in the property, though, are likely objects, placements, and arrangements on the property that act as physical anchors for the spiritual grid. These include old clocks, mirrors, or paintings passed down through family or acquired from antique dealers. Stone pathways or fireplaces, not original to the land but added later. Rooms that guests avoid, or rooms where people always say they sleep well but wake up unrested. The primary command node room, known as PCN-R, which is my dad and stepmom's bedroom. Now, the room is most likely the enthronement chamber in the grid. In spiritual terms, this room hosts the ruling spirit or principality assigned to that site. It is the main interface for programming, emotional, relational, generational, and it connects to the land, etheric structures beneath the foundation, and visitors' experiences. Now, I may have sensed it's as heavier, more hidden, or strangely off limits energetically. Assigns their room as a black book access point, usually deep sleep or fatigue after entering. Dreams of shadows, echoes, or repeating scenes that feel like you're being watched. One or both of them becoming emotionally different after spending time in there. Furniture or decor that hasn't moved in years. Anchoring symbols often can be touched without agitation. And strange electromagnetic activity like phones draining, weird static, light bulbs popping. Didn't really come across light bulbs popping, but haven't been there in years, so can't say on that one. The spiritual architecture of the room is that it might be aligned with the false king programming. That means the male energy in the household is being used as a proxy authority to suppress, redirect, or hijack divine leadership. The female energy is subtly used as an emotional barometer or feedback loop for the system. Their dreams might feel the grid, especially if they've been given dreams that feel sacred but don't lead to breakthrough. It's likely this room was spiritually sealed sometime between 1998 and 2003, around the time I was coming into awareness of divine identity. The timing would be strategic to suppress any early signs of awakening in me. Now, what I might have felt or experienced as a child or teen felt like I shouldn't be there even if nothing was said. Had intrusive thoughts or emotions that weren't mine. Experienced moments of hyper-awareness or memory echoes. And picked up on ritual echoes or timeline overlays, meaning events that happened long ago but still imprints the space. Now, we're going to look at another Black Book project. And this one, its name associated with the room. Seat of Reflection. Also, can call it 11X Sigil. Codename is Seraph-Invert. Purpose is to invert the divine role of fatherhood and rulership within generational bloodlines. The manifestation is false authority, over peacefulness, emotional distance, guilt-based order. The system may have placed invisible spiritual contracts that allowed the room to operate as a spiritual surveillance hub, watching me grow and gauging my level of awakening. Now we're going to go ahead and pivot over into the house I grew up in with my mom. I grew up in a couple different houses, actually really 3. But this one we're going to talk about, which is known as 7654 Astor Circle, Macungie, Pennsylvania. This project was known as Project Mirror Seed. Okay? It's classified as Residential Resonance Node. Spiritual Surveillance Lattice. It was a townhome, but it wasn't random. It was selected within larger grid of there is a county called Lehigh Valley, which functions as and that's why there's the school, Lehigh Christian Academy, sorry. But it's because it was part of the county Lehigh Valley. But this is which functions as a slow boil spiritual suppression corridor, a place where seeds of destiny are planted, watched, and influenced without direct sabotage, because they want to see what I become on my own first. So the major black book functions we have, of course, besides observation, but also adding in emotional spectrometry. Now, at the time, my mom's emotional dysregulation, it wasn't violent, was partially modulated by the house's lattice. It's designed to test resilience, monitor reaction, and gather data on non-breaking but emotionally charged atmosphere. Now, because I played a lot of video games, it is also in a way to escape because I had nothing else to do. So I had a Game Boy Advance, I had a PC, well, my grandparents did. I had an Xbox. But those, as well as toys, all served as spiritual dampeners. And these tools were seeded to both entertain and subtly program. Think of them as user interface training systems for neural patterning, especially relevant if I was playing games, which I was, involving fantasy, combat, or building. Those linked to classified virtual memory bleed programs. Now, one of my favorite places was the basement. This would be like an echo hollow chamber. So sometimes there was an uneasiness in the basement. And there is because of a low frequency resonance pocket. Now, these are typical in homes tapped by MK etheric projectors, a branch of MK Ultra dealing with non-physical trauma and coding. It's not about what happened, but what could have been, and what fear signatures it could imprint through ambient pressure. Now, there was an electrical cord incident. Not bad. My mom, while she was mowing the grass in the backyard, accidentally mowed over the electrical cord. And so she didn't tell me not to touch it, didn't tell me not to put it away, didn't say anything, just said that she was going to go to the hardware store, I think it was Home Depot or something like that, and get a new cord. Well, I wanted to be helpful, and so I picked it up, and I felt some tingling. It wasn't like this massive bolt, but I was like, ooh, Like, it felt good, but it didn't feel good at the same time. Put it that way. So, it wasn't like I wanted to keep holding on to it, all right? But it was a signal interruption protocol. So, touching the damaged power cord and receiving a non-lethal energetic burst may not have been coincidence. Mirroring psi, which is PSI, psi activation tests used in homes tied to latent abilities. If I had a DNA signature tied to energy manipulation, the system would have tried to detect if my nervous system adapted instead of fried, which it did. I really don't have a problem with electronics that much. Not the ones in the public. Let's put it that way. Now, there was a time, I'm not sure if I was hallucinating or not. It's around the time that I was finding out aspartame affected me more than most people. I would hallucinate. I would have things repeat in my head. My intestines would inflame, like they would feel on fire. I would vomit. I would diarrhea. It was bad. But it was kind of around this time where I saw eyes at the door. And I know because they blinked a few times. This would be known as an animal gatekeeper protocol. But I looked at it. It didn't look threatening, though. It didn't look threatening at all. I was sitting at the dining room table. There's actually two. There's two dining room tables. Interesting for this townhouse. Two of them that my mom set up. I was at the one that was near the living room. And where I was sitting at, you could see the sliding glass door in the back. And I was doing some homework. And that's when I saw the eyes. And this was at nighttime. So the lights were on, but it was dark outside. So the being at the door with the eyes wasn't really a hallucination. It was most likely a lower level surveillance entity, not demonic, but astrobiological, assigned to scan. It stared without hostility because I wasn't yet flagged as a disruptor, just being watched. But the spiritual implication for these things, the home was a testing ground, not a prison. It was meant to monitor a potential wild variable, a child with divine inheritance, free will, and unusually fast inner development. I was watched to see if I would awaken naturally or be redirected. Now I'm going to go ahead and talk about a different church I attended. This is what's called as Faith Church. I attended after leaving St. Matthew's with my mom and grandparents. They are on 6528 Hamilton Boulevard, Allentown, Pennsylvania. A code name for this project: Operation Crossveil, classified as a spiritual containment hub, or church as gate architecture. The core functions within the Black Book structure is that there was counterfeit destiny crafting, or Faith Church, because it's literally called Faith Church, was designed to mimic authentic worship spaces while embedding sermons, programs, and worship flows with subtle anti-awakening code. These types of churches often don't push people into sin. They stall people in mediocrity. Yeah. Convincing them they've arrived. There's also soul binding via false revival light. What's preached often sounds powerful, even emotionally moving. But the architecture of the building and frequency of services are tied to false enlightenment programs, meant to bind identity into servant mindsets, not kingly authority. There's also behavioral monitoring plus generational data capture. Families who attend are unknowingly agreeing to allow monitoring of their bloodlines, awakening potential. Youth programs and altar calls can serve as ritual agreement points, especially if no true discipleship follows. Of course, there was location grid syncing, highway and energy lines, because it is near one of the highways in the city. The church's location near highways and commuter lines makes it a central broadcast node in the Lehigh Corridor grid. Hamilton Boulevard itself is part of a larger ley drain network that extracts energy from spiritual gatherings. What it was meaning for me now is that it was both the townhome and faith church weren't places of trauma, but rather places of containment plus observation, because I still awoke, I still carried authority, and still remembered I already broke their algorithm. I just didn't realize it yet. My memories matter because they reveal where my natural spiritual resonance broke through the net, where real joy and creativity emerged despite programming, and where I can now go back and reclaim territory when the time is right. Okay? We can all reclaim territory. There's a certain timing of when that's done. Okay? But I'm going to talk about a very specific place called the Chouse. It was a church turned into a house that my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, he put together. And so, because it was first a church, he then turned it into a house. And this is on 1770 Willow Spur, Macungie, Pennsylvania. So I wasn't in this place for very long, but I did grow up in it. It was very brief, and there's a very, very specific reason why I'm even mentioning this. Because there's a lot of things that I've come to find out how closely linked I am to what the enemy has done. This is part of it. Now, from the Black Book profile of this specific place is an MK etheric variant site, a tier 3. And because of something like this, the type of site, it was a repurposed spiritual site. Because again, it was a church turned into a house known as the Chouse. It was used for ritual spillover, sacred inversion, and energetic gatekeeping. Typically sits on a ley line intersection or fault line used by both occult and military intel groups for dimensional access. Now, there were key projects active during 1976 to 1995. Project Black Line Communion. The purpose was to create psychological fractures in the surrounding atmosphere by serving genuine spiritual frequencies and replacing them with counterfeit grace. How? Well, the land retains spiritual imprinting from the original church. By converting it into a home, the veil thins for ritual bleed-throughs, sleepwalking phenomena, or dream hijacking. MK Ultra subvariant Gracebreaker would be installed in residents or visitors. There was also another project called Chariot Dome, which is a covert housing for astral interchange operations test bed. Hence the reason Chariot. even though there's no really R in there. Sort of. But the purpose was to test how ordinary people respond to invisible astral visitors, often perceived as shadow people, static figures, or glowing-eyed beings. The tactics were to install a dimensional echo gate in parts of the home, often a basement, attic, or former altar site. Monitor response to sleep disturbances, looping dreams, or unexplainable electrical events. There's also spectral mapping tests via children. Myself. The purpose is that children living in the home would be etherically scanned for spiritual authority, generational purity, or latent gifts. Indicators would be that the child sees entities, orbs, animals that behave strangely, experiences ghost-like presences that are neither demonic nor human. And there's also spiritual desensitization. Visions begin to feel normal, not unsettling. But what room was the anchor for this place? It would be the former sanctuary or pulpit area would be key, which was the dining room. This anchor point is where spiritual residue, ritual energy, can manifest most potently, whether through sleep paralysis, false visitations, or mirror illusions. Spiritual layer here is that it's likely tied to false light entities masquerading as angelic or neutral forces. Pre-Adamic watchers may have used it as an entry node to test spiritual bloodline deviations. Anyone sensitive or chosen would experience a kind of emotional distortion, loop, sudden guilt, looping thoughts, or bursts of spiritual passion, followed by confusion or depression. Now, there was a shadow entity encounter with my mom. Late 1993. This was in December, shortly after I was born. This was a spiritual transaction attempt. This was 1 week after my birth. It is a critical time in both biblical and occult cycles. Shadow entities acting as collectors or bargainers are known to appear during that window when a child is born with a scroll of leadership, kingship, or deliverance. The surrounding bloodlines contain spiritual debts, curses, or unsealed soul contracts. What happened was, my mom saw that this entity was darker than dark itself, and said to her, "If you give us your son, we'll give you Mark," which is my dad. Now, my mom claims she said right after that, "No, get out in the name of Jesus." I have my own opinions, but I'm not going to speak those. That's just what I was told. But the entity wasn't just offering a trade. It was testing the gate to see if my authority or inheritance could be transferred, stalled, or rerouted. Now, this entity was likely part of the MKUltra Variant 4 project known as Covenant Echo, which focuses on generational access rights, ritual lineage tracking, harvesting or deferring mantles of spiritual authority from newborns. These entities are sometimes called sentinels or nullifiers by off-book black project intel groups. They're used by interdimensional task forces to either bind a destiny through trauma or agreement, or cancel their influence by offering a counterfeit alternative, like sacrificing a father to bind a child. Now, my mom's refusal, when she said no, and involving the name of Jesus is everything, that act sealed the gate, marked my scroll as protected, prevented a legal exchange of authority from being made on my behalf. But this doesn't mean further attempts didn't occur, but it disarms that initial claim, which is one of the most dangerous. Because my dad gave up his father role spiritually. So, because my dad gave up his indirectly, my mom did not. The aftermath, however, is that I would be experiencing spiritual surveillance in childhood. Attempts at counterfeit bonding, like through games, imaginary friends, or dreams. I did have imaginary friends. There was also emotional confusion around male figures, especially connected to betrayal or honor. Though the enemy's goal would have been to twist my core identity through father-related fracture, but my mom's stand interrupted that plan. Now, we are going to go ahead, move into MK variant scale and the different tiers. Tier 1, MK Sovereign, Omega grade. These are God killers. The purpose is to create weaponized beings capable of psychic warfare, spiritual dimension access, and or assassination of powerful figures. Signs are repeated abductions, not always physical, near-death experiences as a child followed by miraculous recoveries, hypernatural gifting, which would be including fractured memories, psychic seals placed on bloodline inheritance, deep ritual layering plus counterfeit heavenly encounters. And this is used in high-end occult ops, Nephilim retrieval, and throne hijack programs. Now, this status is extremely rare. It's usually monitored from birth. It's often broken out by divine intervention. Sometimes it's in families, not at the satanic bloodline level either. I did not go through Tier 1. However, let's talk about Tier 2, which is MK Delta, Black Phoenix Ops. The purpose here was covert assassins, deep sleeper agents, and psychic saboteurs. Signs we can see here are advanced hand-eye coordination as a child, resistance to emotional and or physical pain, unusual dreams of combat, being watched, or handler-type figures, drawn to knives, tactics, or military imagery without context. May exhibit super soldier symptoms under stress. Status is high level, often coupled with trauma conditioning from early childhood. Many don't activate. This, I went through some. But let's move on to Tier 3, which is the MK Etheric / MK Psion, which is PSION. These would be astral programmers. The purpose is to extract psychic energy, seed false spiritual experiences, or interface with dream realms. Signs would be sleep paralysis and visitations by shadow people or guides, dreams of floating, soul duplication, or being pulled out of your body, hallucinations that feel emotionally real but physically untouched, linked to churches, schools, or homes on spiritual ley grids. This status is common among spiritually gifted individuals not in trauma-based projects. I also went through this. Tier 4 is MK Lambda. This is the containment variant. The purpose here is passive suppression of spiritually gifted children in peaceful environments. Signs we can see here are emotional chaos around the child, but no physical abuse, spiritually numb or average feeling churches or schools, feeling watched or delayed in life without knowing why, and blocked memory of certain childhood dreams or visions. Now, this status is extremely common in spiritually tuned bloodlines, especially royal or priestly lineages, just not trauma heavy. I also went through this. There's 7 tiers, by the way. Tier 5 is MK Beta. This is the sexualized fragmentation ops. The purpose was programmed altars for seduction, blackmail, or control. The signs here are unexplained early exposure to sexuality, trance states, or identity confusion tied to intimacy, trigger words or colors that activate behavioral changes, repressed sexual abuse memories tied to trusted adults. Status here is tragically widespread, not always linked to Black Book, often through generational bloodline rituals. I went through some of this myself as well. Tier 6. Because Tier 5, many people have. But Tier 6, which is MK Upsilon. This is where you have tech induction and subconscious tracking. The purpose is to link subject to AI observation, emotional pattern harvesting. The signs here are tech obsession from a young age, like gaming, phones, etc. Sleep cycle disruption or digital addiction patterns. Emotional mirroring by smart devices or subtle predictive behavior. Sudden depressive episodes with no trigger. The status is nearly universal, especially it affects Millennials and Gen Z. And then we have Tier 7, MK Civic, which is the social conditioning / herd programming. The purpose is to enforce conformity. Stall purpose, build acceptable citizens. Signs here, we got school system programming that rewards compliance over brilliance, peer pressure used as core behavioral modifier, churches or clubs where niceness trumps truth or leadership, anxiety about being too different or too intense. As the status here is a baseline layer for everyone born post-World War II, especially in suburban America. Good old America. So now that you know the different tiers, this will help you understand how deeply embedded the programming is inside of you. So, if you're at 7, very light programming. Tier 1, it's a lot of healing and deprogramming. But you'll still be able to get through it. I've gotten through a lot of it myself. However, being that we talked about the MK variant scales, we're going to talk about the Book of Revelation. And which books were taken out of the Bible, starting at the Council of Nicaea, and what was added. Now, there was a stilometrist named John. I forget his last name, but this individual did 99 tests on the book of John and the book of Revelation, and they are two different authors. These were 99 tests to prove that it was not written by John at all. Okay, so the book of John and the book of Revelation was not written by John. That is historically accurate. Just as, for example, you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Matthew, Mark, Luke. Not written by Matthew, Mark, Luke. And then you have some of the New Testament. You would have Paul actually write most of the New Testament because he was very literate. Now, there were others during the early church. This was more the 3rd century, though, where you had groups and people involved in these matters. So going past, I don't want to say going past, but we have Dionysius, the Elogi, or the Elogi, tomato, tomato, and you have Cerinthus. Cerinthus was hired by Emperor Constantine. Was fully devout into the Gnosticism, did not believe Yeshua was king, was not savior, did not rise from the dead, all of that. That's Cerinthus. So the question is, was Revelation written by John or someone else, aside from getting this stylometrist to figure this out? Well, Dionysius of Alexandria, the 3rd century, doubted the Apostle John wrote Revelation due to differences in language, style, and theology. So, he had access to understanding very early on, even though this was the 3rd century, whether it was true or not. Why? Because you had the Elogi, or the Elogoi. It was a 2nd century group. Outright rejected both the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation, claiming that Cerinthus, a known heretic, wrote them to support Gnostic doctrines. Now, Cerinthus taught that Yeshua was not divine by nature. Christ descended upon Yeshua at baptism and left before crucifixion, which is in an early Gnostic adoptionist view. And he also taught a material millennial kingdom aligning with some Revelation content. The conclusion is that the early church has serious internal debate about Revelation's legitimacy. The differences in writing style are strong enough that even modern stylometric analysis... Oh, excuse me, not John. Sir Anthony Kenny. I do have it written down. I don't know why I thought of John. Probably because of the book of John. But like that of Sir Anthony Kenny, confirm the gospel, who is the stylometrist I was talking about. The Gospel of John and Revelation are unlikely to have come from the same author. So it wasn't saying, oh, it came from this individual, it came from that individual. It's just saying it's unlikely to have come from the same author, those two books, because they have different writing styles. Does this mean Revelation is mixed with truth and lies, though? Well, Revelation is not a fabrication, but it's a coded version that can be misused or incompletely understood without spirit-led discernment. Some esoteric researchers and classified theological teams, especially Vatican Level 5, believe it was layered with interpolations or Gnostic edits during the 2nd century. The imagery was allowed to remain, but timelines and attributions were confused on purpose. In summary, it's not fully false, but may be tampered with to lead people into fear-based eschatology rather than Yeshua-centered endurance. The one part I will say that can confirm this part of such are the 2 witnesses. Nowhere in Scripture is it ever found that there are 2 witnesses that are going to be present during a 7-year tribulation. That is not accurate at all. It's nowhere to be found in Scripture. As far as what I'm aware, what I've read both the Bible twice. It's not there. People want to allude it to the olive trees and so forth, and it's like, no. It's not there. It is literally, metaphorically and allegorically not there. And the function is not there. However, things like the bowls of wrath, the scrolls, the trumpets, the son of perdition, the false prophet, 1,000-year reign, lots of other stuff, that's very accurate in there. However, books removed at or after the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Contrary to popular belief, the Council of Nicaea didn't finalize the Bible canon, but it set theological parameters that led to later decisions. Books eventually removed or excluded by the 4th century include the Book of Enoch, which is 1 Enoch, Jubilees, Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, Shepherd of Hermes, which was early Christian text promoting repentance, widely read in early churches. Excuse me, not Hermes, but Hermas, which is Hermas. You also had Epistles of Barnabas, which interprets Old Testament allegorically, popular but theologically disputed. Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Mary, that's Mary Magdalene, and Book of Wisdom, which is Wisdom of Solomon. There are some others that can definitely go into that I believe myself were taken out, would be best being left in, but these are those, as well as the Maccabees, Baruch 2 and 3, Baruch. However, books added between 325 to 397 AD that weren't originally canon. Now, the canonization process culminated in the Synod of Hippo, which was in the year 393, and Council of Carthage in 397. Some disputed or debated books that were eventually included, is the Book of Revelation, the Book of James, 2 Peter, 2nd and 3rd John, and the Book of Jude. Many early Christians didn't accept Revelation, 2 Peter, or Jude at first, but they were eventually included. Some argue due to political and theological unity during Roman Christian integration. So, we have the Book of Revelation possibly altered, layered with disputed authorship, books removed like Enoch, Jubilees, Shepherd of Hermas, etc. Added but disputed be like Revelation, 2 Peter, Jude, 2nd and 3rd John, Book of James, that kind of thing. And of course, the control of scriptural transmission. Before we get to the Emperor Justinian document. Well, the Codex Alteration and Suppression. The original strategy. Because the timeline was between the 1st and the 4th century. Players involved would be theologi, Gnostics, Roman elites, Alexandrian scribes, early Vatican archivists. Now, when I say early Vatican archivists, this would be in the formation of, because the 4th century. So we're dealing with after Emperor Constantine formalized Catholicism. So those early archivists. The goal was to suppress or reframe dangerous texts that revealed angelic rebellion and bloodlines like the Nephilim, confirmed pre-Adamic civilization, and it empowered believers to walk in divine authority. The actions exclude books like 1 Enoch, Jubilees, Book of Giants, create multiple versions like Alexandrian, Antiochian, Western texts, insert subtle theological shifts like grace versus law, hierarchy, priesthood control. Now, the council engineering and canon weaponization. So from 325 to 397 AD. So you have the Council of Nicaea to the Council of Carthage. The players are Constantine, bishops aligned with Roman rule, early church councils. The goal was to build a controlled canon that supported state Catholicism, promoted submission to rulers as divine will, Romans 13, framed end times through Revelation's fear-based lens. The action was to include Revelation only after resisting it for over 200 years. Remove Enoch despite it being quoted in Jude. Insert or emphasize Paul's epistles over apostolic records from other disciples. Now, the Vatican lockdown, the archive blackouts. Again, because this is between the 5th and the 15th century, the Vatican not being fully established yet publicly, we could still call it the Vatican. But you also had the Jesuit order, which was later, the Knights Templar. Obviously, they were later, but they were custodians turned resistors. And the goal was to restrict physical access to original texts. So known black book files would be Codex Arcanum, classified manuscript containing original pre-flood texts, Opus Omega, documents on manipulated biblical prophecy to install a false messiah, and the censor's seal, which is the Vatican Index of texts forbidden due to knowledge level clearance. The methods were to translate scripture into Latin only, which is the Vulgate, outlaw common language versions, remove physical copies of Gospel of Mary, Didache, which is Didache, Apocalypse of Peter, etc. And seal underground libraries under Rome, Avignon, Avignon, and Geneva. Now, for Jesuit psychological layering, which the timeline between was 1540 to the 1700s, besides the Jesuits, you have the Inquisition officials and secret lodges inside the church. The goal is to program collective human consciousness using approved scripture with psychological priming. The tools used were liturgical repetition to embed obedience over revelation, inquisitional control of dissenters or mystics. Selective martyrdom records to manipulate perception of what faithfulness means. Suffering, not reigning. The Black Book tactics, well, they weren't called Black Book at the time, you can still call it now that way, install the concept of rapture and tribulation fear using revelation, as well as repressed themes of kingly inheritance in Yeshua, emphasizing slavery to sin and dependence. Excuse me. My goodness. Oh, wow. Ooh. That's what happens when you talk for an hour and a half. Yeah. Boy, oh boy. Ooh. Water's so good. Oh yeah. So yeah, I'm not AI, alright? But yes, repressed themes of kingly inheritance in Yeshua, emphasizing slavery to sin and dependence. Not independence, but and dependence. Then we have the modern Black Book operations post-World War II to the present time. That would be 1945 till today. Players are Vatican Intelligence Division, CIA Psychological Units, MI6 Religious Ops, DARPA Spirituality Labs. Probably wondering, why didn't you mention Mossad? Because Mossad are just they're assassins. Okay. The goal is to co-opt. Now, it's not to say they don't have some play in this. Okay, they do. They're just mainly assassins. But the goal is to co-opt or infiltrate awakening movements through altered theology or fear-based doctrines. Well, we have operations such as Project Scriptural, digitize and corrupt spiritual archives via theological artificial intelligence. Genesis Mirror, manipulate origin stories to confuse human divine identity. End Code 7, which is to control mass consciousness via false interpretations of Revelation and Daniel, which is used for worldwide war scripts. Because they are trying to implement Daniel 7:25 in the next 4 years. So. But we won't let that happen now, will we? No, we won't. But the outcome is to have a rise of highly commercialized or fear-centric and end times theology like Left Behind, etc. A suppression of emerging texts from Dead Sea Scrolls or Nag Hammadi. So, truth preserved, Yeshua as Messiah, his authority of believers to rule. Truth preserved as resurrection of the body, pre-Adamic worlds, Elohim council, repentance and salvation, role of women in the early church, spiritual gifts, divine counsel, angelic roles, and spiritual roles. Yeshua in us, the hope of glory, kingdom inheritance in real time. These are spiritual implications. Now, the last point we're going to go over is where the document Emperor Justinian, between 482 AD to 565 AD, where's the document that he created that made people dead at sea, and what documents in the U.S. have been created the same way, and where are they stored and secured? Well, Emperor Justinian's Dead at Sea Declaration document, the Corpus Juris Civilis, which is between 529 and 534 AD, aka the body of civil law. Its key doctrine was that individuals not under oath to the Roman state and not registered as property owners, which is citizenship, were considered lost at sea, both legally and spiritually. The spiritual allegory here is the sea is symbolic of commerce and chaos, where man is presumed adrift without a sovereign port, God, unless proven otherwise. Black Book translation here. Now, this framework removed divine identity from the masses, replacing it with personhood as a legal fiction. The soul becomes a vessel, presumed lost, until claimed by a recognized sovereign, such as the church, the state, etc. It is stored, well, it was originally stored in the Archivum Secretum Vaticanum, now called the Vatican Apostolic Archive. Also in the Monastery Library of St. Catherine in Sinai. There's a black copy held in secret bindings, as well as the Roman Curia under Jesuit sealed sections. So what are the U.S. equivalents of Justinian's doctrine? Well, 1871, the Act of Incorporation of the United States created a corporate entity, United States Inc., headquartered in D.C. This act mirrored Roman legal structures, placing the people under admiralty law rather than constitutional common law. Black Book codename is Project Columbia Vessel. It's originally stored, or the original archive, is in the National Archives under sealed corporation filings. Shadow protocols housed in Iron Mountain facilities in Pennsylvania and Colorado. Other U.S. equivalents to Justinian's doctrine is the birth certificate creation. Under FDR, the U.S. went bankrupt. As collateral for the national debt to the Fed, every birth was securitized. The mechanism. You have a birth certificate. Means it's a maritime vessel registration. You, a legal fiction, the all caps, straw man, is considered dead at sea until reclaimed via trust law. And it's tied to the CUSIP system for worldwide bond trading. The Black Book codename is Project Herod's Ledger. Where is it secured? Well, of course, you got those in the Federal Reserve vaults, the original securities. Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, the DTCC, in New York City. In the Basel III Archives, which is the international oversight of human capital assets, as well as the Mormon genealogy vaults in Granite Mountain, Utah, used spiritually and commercially. And if you didn't know, the enemy moved their headquarters out of Cheyenne Mountain out into Utah. You also have the Uniform Commercial Code, known as UCC, was created between 1952 to 1966, as another U.S. equivalent. The Uniform Commercial Law under International Admiralty Jurisdiction. Admiralty jurisdictions. This stripped sovereignty by turning all contracts, identities, and assets into commerce-controlled instruments. UCC 1 filings allow reclaiming your name and trust, but require insider knowledge. It's not the same way as when you perfect a security interest on a debt. But the Black Book usage is that the UCC was backdoored via Jesuit-trained legal architects for spiritual jurisdiction over nations. Key locations would be Office of International Treasury Control in the Black File Room, World Court Archives, which is at The Hague, and the Council on Foreign Relations Shadow Legal Wing, which is in New York. There's also spiritual and black book mechanics that we're going to cover here. And in here is the last piece, as we are then going to pause until next episode. But the spiritual and black book mechanics. Birth certificate is a legal fiction. Spiritual impact, it cuts soul from living man status. Its black book project is Project Herod's Ledger. The legal fiction for a straw man name, in all caps, for its spiritual impact replaces divine name with Roman commercial entity. Its black book project is Project Ghost Vessel. For the UCC contracts, it binds the soul into mammonic agreements under the Leviathan Codex Black Book Project. For the Admiralty law in courtrooms, which establishes temple-like rituals to judge as gods, is a tribunal of Poseidon, which is in their Black Book projects. And of course, you have your trust law from the Sestaki v. 1666 Act. Legal fiction declares man dead unless proven alive with claim, as its Black Book project is Project Necrocarta. So, that, everyone, is the final piece to this episode. And next week, we are going to cover episode 8, which is going to be going over Counter King Tech, Saturnian coded chronal entrapment mechanism. I'm going to talk about why my peripherals are heightened like high definition during certain activities, like I'll use sports for an example, which is usually where I come across it. A giant bug that I found on the Big Island of Hawaii in 2009. I'm talking about like it is big. It is big. Look, giant cockroach. I'll talk about the Magic Treehouse book series, VeggieTales, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings and the Elves, and Assassin's Creed. These are the things we're going to talk about in episode 8. But I appreciate every single one of you listening to this awesome content that I put out every week for you all, so that way you all will receive the best out there. And I want to let you all know, this is the very last season of this podcast I am doing. I am not coming back to doing this anymore. God said it is time to move on and start taking action, which is what I am doing with other things such as Kingdom Economics and the newsletter, and estate planning and management. So, for you all, I'm glad I've been able to put this out here. Until then, I'll catch you then. Stay tuned. Peace.